morning, everyone. Very welcome to all of you to today's class. This is Research Writing and Communication course organized by the Consciousness Studies program at the National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bangalore. So we have Dr. Madhurima again with another interesting class, I'm sure. So we welcome you, ma'am, and welcome to all the participants as well. So today's class is going to be about effective communication and presentation, part 1. So over to you, ma'am, and let's begin the class.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Meera. Participants, I hope you all were able to do your assessments because we'll be discussing them. In case you haven't managed to complete it, I'll give you a couple of minutes maybe to complete it, because only then will you actually understand why is it that each of us communicate differently? Why is it that we keep some things in mind? Why is it that you react differently in communication, right? So while the first 5 units dealt per se with research writing, I felt that research writing is not complete unless I also tell you how to communicate about your research. Right? Not only are you writing as scholars, but you also are presenting. You're presenting papers, you're presenting in conferences, you're talking to your peers, right? Every institution obviously has its presentations and seminars annually or biannually where students present. But it's important for you all to understand that presentation is a skill that each of us can build, right? Some of us may already feel confident about presentation, but for some of us, it's a skill that we can build. So the next 6 hours, I'm actually going to spend with you teaching you that. So we'll start with the basics of communication today. We will move to storytelling and narrative. Why is narrative important? Who is your audience when you're presenting a narrative, right? We are all storytellers. Okay, even if you present our research work, we are storytellers at the end of the day. And how do you tell your story? And finally, I'm going to look at 2 very important management components, which I'm going to bring into research presentation. One is the golden circle, and the other is the circle of influence. Okay, they're 2 different things by 2 different management proponents, but extremely useful as tools of influencing somebody, as tools of persuading somebody. So you're writing a grant proposal. What are you doing? You're persuading somebody. How do you persuade? So some practical skills interwoven with how you present your narrative is what we are doing in this entire unit. Let me share the screen right now for today's session. I trust you're able to see my presentation.
Yeah, we can see it now.
Okay, I'm just waiting for it to get the slideshow. All right. Okay, so this is what we're doing. We're looking at effective communication and presentation. Okay. How many of you here feel you're effective communicators? You can either raise your hand or write in the chat. How many of you feel you're effective communicators? Quite a few. Sort of. Okay. Okay. Effective communicators. Okay. I do see a lot of hands. Sort of. We're going to figure out what this sort of is, right? Because again, how do we look at Sivangani? You're saying not me. Aditi, depends on the situation. Okay. Kanchan says yes. Pragya says yes many a times. Yeah. Effective. Okay. Okay. We'll also understand what's effective communication. I like Ashita, I like your answer. You're saying in your head, you're effective, right? But you'll realize that if you're effective in your head, you're effective in practice. Because a lot of times we are able to translate, but then some of us take time. So we will see if you take time in that transcending from the head to the action, we'll also figure that out. And we'll discuss what tools are there, right? Not much, okay, effective when it comes to my mother tongue. Yes, Gaurav, I think a lot of us, right? One of the biggest learnings that have been for me as a facilitator when I teach students from multiple disciplines is that most of us think in our vernacular when we communicate, right? Because that's our core strength. We are trained to think in our vernacular. And a lot of us write in English after thinking in our vernacular, unless you have grown up speaking English, right? So it's very normal. Okay, don't look at it as an impediment, but look at it as a strength, because I think vernacular languages have a strength which English doesn't in some manner. But well, English is a language that's used officially. English is a language you need to communicate with the world. And that's why we need English, and we need to be good at it, right? Good at communicating with English. But it is absolutely okay if you're able to write. I also know scholars who write in their vernacular and then translate the entire paper into English. A lot of well-known authors, right, who have won international awards, a lot of them in literature. I think all of you who are literature students would know that they write in their mother tongue, right? And their translated work is what many of us read. I have a lot of authors whose translated work I read all the time, and it's absolutely brilliant, but I'm sure it doesn't do us justice because our vernacular can express itself very beautifully. So that is not an impediment at all, okay? I keep talking to myself, but when it comes to speaking, I don't communicate well. Yeah. So we'll also see. Some of you have written that, right? We'll also see, is it about a style? Is it about something that's, blocking? Is there a barrier? So we will break. So a lot of these are mental biases. So we will also work on breaking these biases. And that's why we are spending 6 hours to do this. Because there's a lot of practice. There's a lot of, the assessments that I gave you all yesterday, right, which was sent across by the team, is to understand your own way to communicate, right? And you will notice that each of us have different strengths, and we should play to our strengths, right? So if I'm somebody who can speak well, if I'm somebody who can tell stories, who's very anecdotal, I will use that. Correct? But then there is somebody for whom it's about facts and figures, excellent with data. You can remember numbers at the tip of your fingers. You should use data to communicate. Correct? Then there are some of us who are good at connecting the dots, right? So you could take things that different authors have spoken and you can connect the dot and tell your story. So you have to see what's your strength, because each of these styles of communicating are all good. Okay, but we'll have to figure it out what works for us. Right? Some of us speak better than we write. Some of us write better than we speak. Very few people do both well. And if you're doing both well, that's excellent. But then if you're doing both well and you're happy with both, then you should share tips with the rest of the group. But otherwise, most of us have one side which is a little more higher up. Yeah, I mean, for some of us, maybe one form of communication we are more comfortable with, we are more expressive with, right? Okay, all right. So to start with, for the next thing, Meera, can you just share that poll link with everyone, please? I want to understand what, according to you, is effective communication. And I know last time you all were upset because I gave you all one option. So this time I've given you all 3 options to choose, right? So let us see what answers come up.
Just a second, ma'am. I'm sharing it right away.
Yeah. Zahida, like me what, Zahida? Like you, ma'am, is a very vague three words there. But okay, the poll link is there. Everybody, come on. Go to the poll link. Let me also get there. Poll link, let me see. Okay, start. Start voting, people. 5 people have voted. Okay. All right, 13, 16. Let's see, 20. Okay. Okay, 50, 53 of you. How many participants? We want 147 participants. Let's see how many of you are able to vote. Thanks, Zahida. That's a compliment, and you're very kind. All right, let's look at this. Okay, I see a trend. I see some kind of a trend. Getting your point across with clarity, that's the most important thing about effective communication. Okay, making sure they have understood what I want. That's also important, right? That remember, there's a goal to communication, right? Just the way to writing, there's a goal. There is a goal to communicating also, right? When you're speaking, communication is not just about writing, communication is also about speaking, right? That they have understood. Listening, reiterating, yeah? Each time we all talk, I always summarize what you're saying, right? I reiterate, I rephrase it in some manner, right? To make sure that I have understood what you're saying and you have understood what I'm trying to tell you. Okay, expressing empathy, answering all relevant questions. Yeah, I'm glad nobody chose the second option so far, but okay. So basically it's about getting your point across, right? It's about getting your point across. It's isn't first and fourth the same, Rishabh? First and fourth, no. First is about clarity in communication. It's about telling what you want to tell people. Empathy is about being kind in communication. Empathy is about listening. Empathy is about knowing when not to interrupt somebody's empathy. Right? Empathy is if somebody's telling you something difficult, they have had a tough day and they're talking about it, not to interrupt, not to judge. That's empathy. That's why empathy is expressed in communication. So there are two completely different skills to have, and they're two, first and fifth. First and fifth, making sure, no, one is getting your point across. Making sure they have understood comes later, Rishabh. First is to get your point across. They're two different things. They're two different skills, you'll notice as we move ahead. Okay, all right. Okay, that's, I'm going to go back to the presentation. That's quite a bit of things there. But then what are we doing? Like I said, okay, keep these thoughts in mind, but what are we looking at when we look at effective communication presentation? Today, we are going to understand how do we communicate, right? Your first assessment that I sent you all, the VAK, tells us how do we communicate, okay? The next thing, we are going to look at what is essential communication. Okay, what are the things that you have to do if you want to communicate well? If you want to reach out to somebody, if you want to make sure that somebody's understood, what is it that you have to do? That's essential. Then what is effective? How do you make sure that the person across has not only understood, but the communication goes beyond that? The person takes an action, right? And we're going to connect that call to action later tomorrow, next week when we do storytelling. But how do you make sure somebody acts on that? That's effective communication. Then we're going to look at our communication styles, right? We're going to look at whether we are assertive, whether we are passive, right? A lot of times our personalities impact how we communicate. For example, some of us who are extroverts could also be people who are more comfortable talking. Some of us who are introverts could be people who are more comfortable listening, right? But then none of us are actually that extreme. A lot of us are ambiverts, which means in our comfortable circle, we are extroverts, but otherwise put in an unknown situation, we could all become introverts. And there's no right and wrong. There are personalities and they impact how we communicate, how we talk. So yes, Shubhrika, you have raised your hand. Is there something you want to ask me? Shubhrika, I see that you've raised your hand. Is there something you want to ask?
We are trying to unmute you, Shubhrika.
You can also, no, ma'am. Okay, okay. All right, okay. And finally, we're going to talk about two skills today. We're going to talk about inquiry and advocacy, right? We are going to look at it from a communication perspective, and I'm going to tell you why is it important to inquire as a scholar? Why is it important to advocate? So we will close our session today with these components. Next week, we will look at storytelling techniques and research narratives in presentation. What will make your presentation effective? Okay, irrespective of the domain you're from. Okay, and finally, we will look at, to close the entire modules that I'm taking, we will look at the circle of influence. You will again do some assessments there and come for the class. And we will look at the golden circle and by Simon Sinek. Okay, we will look at those. One is given by Stephen Covey, the other is given by Simon Sinek. We'll look at that on day 3. Okay, so that's how this module, which is one of our longest module, I think, has been planned. Okay, now what are the basic essentials of communicating? Okay, you had raised that earlier. All right, Shubhrika, thank you. Okay, what are the basic essentials to communicate? Okay, have you all done the VAK assessment? Yeah? Have you done the VAK assessment? Okay, all right, fantastic. I see a lot of yes coming. That's wonderful. Okay, each of these assessments together would have taken you all about 15 to 20 minutes. Okay, they're very basic. And like I said in the assessment, there is no right or wrong. Okay, it tells you your own style of communicating. Okay, Raj, you're also giving me your answers. Keep that with you because I'll tell you what your answers mean. Okay, now the first assessment that you did, which is the VAK, it's your learning style. Now, why is it important for you all as research scholars to understand what's your learning style? It's important because the way you learn, you also teach. Okay, now for example, when I did the VAK, I'm a kinesthetic person. I'll explain that to you in a while. I learn by doing, right? So if I had to do this class for you all face to face or, not in a virtual medium, I would have used things like theater. I use a lot of dance to teach communication. Okay, I even do research writing wherein I make people do, paint on Kodak cloth. Right? So these are activities that I do because I learn by doing, and I'm a kinesthetic person. So it's important for us to understand how do we learn, because we often as scholars also communicate and teach in the same manner. Okay, so let's look at what this means. Now in your assignment, you have A, B, and C. Now you have to total and say whether you have got highest A's, highest B's, or highest C's. Now, if you have got highest A's, it means you are visual as a person. Okay, and I'll tell you what that means. If you've got highest B's, it means you're auditory as a person. Okay, and if you've got highest C's, it means you're a kinesthetic person. Very rarely, but it happens, we have people who get ties in their scores. Okay, which could be that you have both the strengths. Okay, now I'm going to come to the ties. I'm going to ask people, Spandita, you got 10, 10, 10. Yeah, Anvesha, you got A and B. Yeah. Okay, interesting. Yeah. So if you have a difference of 1, it still means one is stronger, but some of you could have ties. Then you have to see. But if somebody has tie in all the 3, I would ask you to maybe in your current phase, you're actually looking at communicating in multiple ways and you have multiple stakeholders. That's how it would explain your current scores. Otherwise, what it would mean is that usually we have one which is stronger. Usually one is stronger. But if you have ties, it could mean that you have them right now. What is the C? C is kinesthetic. A is visual. B is auditory. I'm coming to it, guys. Okay, I'm coming to it. I'm going to explain it to you. C is kinesthetic. So let's understand what it means. Okay, let's understand. And then you have to tell me whether it matches how you learn. Okay. So let's look at this. So what do visual people do? Okay. Now, visual learning is where it's about you learn well by seeing things, by observing people. Okay. So in my presentation, if there are pictures, if there are diagrams, if there are displays, my handouts, a person who learns visually will remember those components of it. Right. So a visual person, when you're reading a book, a visual person will actually be able to tell me, you know, Madhurima, page number 274, left-hand column, there were these 5 little bullet points. That's a visual person. You have like a photographic memory often. You're great with spatial memory. You will remember in a mall which floor has which store, and in which store which aisle has which kind of clothes or which kind of accessories. Right? You are a visual person. You learn well with diagrams. You learn well when I show you charts. Yeah, you are somebody who will look forward to see, okay, is my handout just content, or do I also have some amount of smart arts or graphs in it? Right? A visual learning person will learn the component very well if I have to show a film. For example, a lot of times when I teach personality in my behavioral science course, I use this movie called The 12 Angry Men, okay, to understand different personalities. And I ask my students to watch that movie and come back, and then we analyze that movie. Okay, now students who are visual learners are able to grasp the concept very, very well because it appeals to their visual component. Okay, they learn well. Okay, so that's the first one. All of you who have got highest in A, you are strong visual learners. Okay, I see a lot of messages on chat. Will these learning and teaching personalities shift? Yes. Yes, Rishabh, a lot of times, when you look at neuro-linguistic programming, they say that VAK is the basis, but VAK is one of the first things on communication that was ever studied. And that's why I am starting with you all at the basics, right? If I have to do cognitive learning, if I have to do NLP, that has to be part 2 of the course in terms of learning. But VAK is the basic. Unless you understand how each of our learning styles differ, it's very difficult to understand how do we program the content in the mind. Okay. Yeah, Sunil, there are different styles of communication in the movie. Yeah, it's there. Shamnuja, 12 Angry Men. Yeah, there is a Hindi version. Yes, I've heard that. You can mix the learning styles. We do that. I'll come to that. I'll explain all these questions shortly. Then, many of you may have got highest Bs, which is auditory. Now, what does auditory mean? Now, a lot of you could log into the Zoom. You may not even need to look at my slides. It's there, but it's part of your peripheral vision. Your focus is on listening to me, right? And that's why constantly I also check with Meera. I'm constantly checking, are you able to see my slide? Are you able to listen to me? Are you able to hear? Correct? Because a portion of my audience is always auditory. You all will not remember the slides. You all will not remember the pictures. What you'll remember is what I have said. And that's where the responsibility of a researcher becomes very important, to remember and understand what you're saying. The spoken word, the sounds, the noises is what you'll remember. Okay, today in some time, I'm going to be using all these three components to show that each of you will actually pick different components from that video. And you will see how that works. Okay, then we have kinesthetic, right? By doing. Okay, for example, that when I do these polls, what am I trying? I would ideally have liked to do breakout rooms, but I think with the coordinating team, we had some discussion. You all are such a large number. Breakout rooms would be a lot of happy chaos, and we thought we should avoid happy chaos in 2 hours. And so I'm using polls, or I'm trying to send you all some exercises. We're doing exercises. So that's my one, I would say, feeble attempt to appeal to the kinesthetics. But for example, if I have to tell the kinesthetic people that we are going to do some action, we're going to do something today, and you will realize that it works for you. You remember it better. You remember those examples from my class better, rather than what I'm showing you on the presentation or what I'm speaking. So each of our styles are different. Sometimes we mix these styles. How does a kinesthetic style? There's no good or bad, Spandita. If it's 10, 10, 10, it basically means you have a strength in all the 3 areas. Okay. I have a question here where you're saying that unless it's live simulations, okay, how does kinesthetic person learn better? I think, Rishabh, that is the challenge. Our traditional systems of learning often did not cater to kinesthetic people, right? If I had to teach this while I myself was a student, right, 15 years back, and I had to teach, a lot of times I didn't have these kind of kinesthetic things. Okay, but I think today learning is much more a combination of these 3 styles. So when you are looking at an audience, this is something you have to remember. Your auditory is 15% of your audience, your visual is another 30, and your kinesthetic is the other 30-35. Okay, pure auditory is very, very low. Okay, most people are a combination of auditory, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, visual, kinesthetic. Okay, and Spandita, for you, look at that as a strength. Don't get worried. There's no good or bad. Look at it as a strength. Possibly, like for example, the auditory learners here. Okay, if any of you are pure auditory, you would be excellent with learning on audio files, audio books. You would be people who listen a lot to podcasts. My auditory learning is very low. I have really tried, but I think I've listen to a few podcasts, which are my favorites, but otherwise I'm a person who needs to read, who needs to experience, who needs to touch and feel a book. I don't even like ebooks. I don't even like Kindles, right? For people who are auditory, audiobooks, podcasts are excellent. Okay. That's a good question. One of you has asked that. One thing is, are we predisposed? Yes, we are predisposed to some extent to one approach of learning. But today, like you see, because there's so much focus on visual, there's so much focus on kinesthetic, we have moved towards being visual and kinesthetic, right? For example, a lot of your journals today, right? Instead of asking you to just submit an abstract, they ask you to send a video, a short video of your abstract. Have any of you come across journals like that? Right? And you can train yourself to be. It's all about training. It's all about practice. These are skills. A bit of it could be inherent, but all communication skills can be built over time. Please remember that, right? It's important for you to understand that. Okay. Yeah. Ritushri, if you haven't come across, a lot of journals today actually ask you for a small audio clip. Okay. And it's important. Now, a lot of us, okay, as children would read loudly to learn. Okay, now why is that? Because when you read loudly, your auditory factor is working and you're looking at a book. Many of us have retained that habit as adults. We still read loudly. Correct? That could be because some of us still have auditory strong as a learning. No good or bad. What I'm saying is adapt and understand what's your strength and use that to your benefit. Right? If you're somebody who's great with audio learning and reading a 500-page book is a task, see if you get an audio file of that author speaking. You will remember it much better. Right? A lot of times, at least in management, I know you have I had friends who didn't like reading an entire book. Okay. Then there were some cases wherein, the authors would actually it's an open source thing. Authors would actually put up presentations of their chapters, which are shorter, which are summarized versions. And I had friends who would just look at those presentations and learn the main components for the exam. Okay, it works for people. Some people, yes, Ahmed, I see what you have said. You have said you listen to audio and you also have the book in front of you. Some people also do that. Yeah. So there is a little difference between Rishabh, your example, right? Rote learning is a different component of the brain. So you will not remember, if you're an auditory person is not necessarily a rote learning person. Okay, but you will have to do a combination. Okay, but you said that somebody told you that you're primarily auditory and not visual, but it's possible that at that point when they did the test, your auditory component was high. But if you by experience feel you're a visual person, you're a visual person. There is only so much these psychometric tests will tell us, and always remember, lean on them to understand 70 to 80% of you. Remember that they cannot get you 100%. That's why we are human beings. We are complex. We're not that simple, right? So, and we all learn differently. Okay, depending on what we are learning, it would be different. Niti, for a dyslexic person, I think there may be a scale that's customized for them. I'm sorry, I do not know right now, Niti, but maybe I can look at it and get back to you. Would that help? Yeah, let me do that, Niti, because I don't have an answer, so I do not want to tell you that this works. I'll have to get back on that. Okay. So this is something that we have to keep in mind. Now, what happens with the way yeah, Nida, what you're feeling, what you're experiencing is very common, which means maybe you're not an audio person. So Nida, you have to look back at your score and see what is higher. Is visual or kinesthetic higher for you? Maybe that's why it works for you, and that's why audio doesn't work for you, right? Very few people have very high audio scores, very few. And also today, with the influx of information, we have mostly traversed to become visual. Everything is seeing, right? Everything is learning. Okay, but then yeah, Nisha, I like that example. You can listen effectively to somebody speaking, but while learning, yeah, it's the same thing. Nida, you have scored 14 in auditory. What's your other scores? That becomes important. You have to look at it in comparison with the others. Okay, so a lot of us, we may listen to somebody speaking and remember, because we are seeing the person also at the same time. But in an audio thing, you're not seeing the person, you're only listening. So for some of us, that may not be effective. And text is not pure visual. You're right, Shamlaja. Text is not pure visual. Text is a lot of things. Nida, B is auditory. A is visual. It's V-A-K. A is visual. So you're high visual, Nida. A is visual, B is auditory, C is kinesthetic. It's V-A-K. Yes, practice and conditioning also changes. That does happen. If I'm conditioned to work in an audio environment, right, then over time you'll become, for example, your radio jockeys have to develop auditory skill very well. Okay, because for them it's all about listening, right? It's all about getting that tonality, understanding the emotion. Okay. Okay, so this doesn't have anything to do with memory. This is learning. You could have memory of lyrics and music, Soumya, because you could be associating it with an emotion. That's what it happens. There is no upper hand. All of them are good as long as it helps you learn. There is no upper hand. But yeah, if you are in a job that's completely kinesthetic and you're not a kinesthetic person, you will find it difficult to adapt and adjust. Right? So that's where the problem may arise. Otherwise, there's nothing like one is better than the other. If your value in one is very high, doesn't mean you can't improve on the others, nothing like that. All these keep changing. This learning styles will keep changing over time. Okay, so you have to remember that what your scores are today, it will not be the same if you do this maybe in a year or two. Because depending on your current job, depending on the kind of people you're interacting with, depending on the resources that you're using, your styles will differ and you can improve your learning styles. Yeah, the score is just a small component of it. The idea is how are you using this style to learn and how are you using this style to express. That is what you all need to keep in mind. Okay, so let's look at this. So a visual learner prefers reading and visual materials like pictures, symbol, color, shape, videos. Now, if you are teaching somebody who's visual, I have to kind of make sure I'm using pictures, charts, and all that. Auditory person obviously learns better by listening. So to make sure that the person is auditory, I think, give me a moment. I think Narsimha, you said you will ask your children to learn to read loud, right? I think in the chat you mentioned something like that, so that they remember. But you'll have to also make sure that they're auditory before you do that, because then they will benefit from it. But if they're not auditory, then they will get distracted. So if they're kinesthetic, what you can ask them to do is draw a picture, draw a flowchart from what you have read. Do you remember the concept? Instead of just asking them to by heart and mug it up and rote learn, right? I think today there are so many learning ways that we are learning that we can do with our children that adaptation is much more easier. Okay, so that then with kinesthetic is, like I said, hands-on activities, provide tangible objects to work with, such as flashcards, right? Remember, I said make your cue cards when you do your literature review. For somebody, yeah, that's a good thing, Narsimha, if you're not asking them to by heart. That's a good thing. That's how we should be. You want to improve your auditory. One of the ways to, okay, so now let me look at how to improve each of these. If it's a score, if it's concerning you that you're not scoring high. For people whose visual scores are low and you think you want to improve, what I would do is maybe look at material, learning material that's more visual, right? When you're reading a paper, also see what do the graphs mean, what do the charts mean, what do the representations mean. Okay, that's something that you can look at. For somebody who wants to improve your auditory, when you're reading a book, also see if that author has TED Talks or if that author has podcasts, right? Once you read the book, you finished it visually, which is your strength. You want to improve auditory, listen to that podcast. It will help you remember and retain better. Okay, for people who are kinesthetic, whenever you read a component, right, in your domain, see if you can do something like an experiment for it, right? It could be absolutely anything. Right? For example, I teach team dysfunctions or team coordination, right? I do a script, I do a theater script, right? And I give team scripts, okay? And then I ask each team to work on different component of the script. So I ask one team to work on dialogue. So what are they doing? They're writing down the dialogues. I ask one team to make music out of things that they find around in the training room, right? It could be anything that they can use. Okay, you could clink a glass, you could do something with pen and pencil, you could do something wherein you're tapping on the table and making music, you could crumple used paper and make music, right? Anything. And then I ask another team to do some kind of an artwork to create a background for the play. Now, what am I doing? I'm actually using learning styles, but I'm also seeing how teams coordinate with different learning styles. And you will see how beautifully this actually works. Today, I'm breaking it down for you to understand in a session, but each of us seamlessly move between these styles when it is required for us. So don't get too worked up. If your scores are very low, you can work on it and you can improve on it. Now, some of you may have similar scores. So there may be a difference of 1 point between two faculties, right? Visual and auditory, visual and kinesthetic, which means both are your strength. You use both of them. But it depends on the source of information that you choose to maybe focus on one component, right? It's about you. This entire assessment is about you, and there is no right and wrong answer. Okay, have we understood this? Can I move on to the next component? Have you understood VAK, everybody? Yeah. Okay, let me move on. Yes, the coordination does depend on the kind of work also, like I said, but then we as human beings can adapt and we can change and improve. Okay, now in communication, Rishabh, you have raised your hand. Do you have a question, Rishabh? Tell me, Rishabh. Yeah.
Yeah, so the question is with regards to VAK, is the entire focus of VAK on the way we absorb information, or is it to do with processing? For example, if I were to think of something, I'm very heavily visual, so I remember and do things. But lately, I was told that I'm very heavily auditory in terms of learning, but my processing could be very visual. Like I can't remember things without the visuals.
Okay, so the memory is the next component, right? In memory, we also have the short-term memory, the working memory, and the long-term memory, right? So VAK is how we first learn and process that information, VAK looks at the initial stage of the communication, right? Because in memory, now say for example, Rishabh, I'm a very kinesthetic person. I learn things by doing, right? But when it comes to my memory component, my memory becomes visual. So I can actually in my head create a flowchart of how I do that activity, what did I learn out of it, and what does it mean, and then retain the information that's important for me. So it's not really that compartmentalized, right? But then like you said, it's possible that you process information in a particular way, but in terms of memory, you store it in a particular way. And so if it's that, you know, you're visual in the initial processing, but later you're auditory, what would help you there is maybe learn the initial things visually, and maybe then to restore it. A lot of times people also use dictaphones, record what they have learned and understood and listen back to them to learn. Okay, they are pure auditory people in terms of memory and learning. Does that help? But what you have to remember, Rishabh, is it's not compartmentalized. It's not as it's not like blocks. We are human beings, right? You're constantly moving. Correct. Now, Rishabh, let's take an example. Do you watch series? Do you watch series, mini series, documentaries? Is there anything you have watched of late? Something that you can share. Documentaries. Can you give me an example of something that you've seen of late? If you don't want to give the name, let me give you an exercise to do. Think of 3 things, environmental hazards. Think of 3 things that you remembered from the documentary. Okay. Now that's your memory component. You will then also realize how did those 3 things, how were those 3 things shown? The next thing, 3 things that impacted you the most. Okay. From an impact perspective, one is memory remembering, one is impact. Then one thing that you saw in the documentary, a style or a way of narration that you would use later. And you will see that in most cases, it's a combination of audio, visual, and kinesthetic. Are you able to relate to that, Rishabh? Yeah. So we process information, we store it a little differently. Each of us, for example, our language areas are different, right? We have the Broca's area, which functions differently for different people. So why is it that some of us are good with mnemonics? Because our language and memory are good, right? But then there are some people who cannot use mnemonics. It's not to do with the fact that they're not inclined to use it, but it's that you can improve the skill of using mnemonics by practice. Yes, retaining information is Shruti is also about how much can you relate. The relatability of information becomes important, but that's where the memory component becomes important. How are we chunking information? How are we remembering information? Right? We are moving to the domain of understanding memory and retention, but that's a different thing. So there comes in, to get to that conversation, we have to start with how are we attending to the information? How's our attention span? Like somebody said, attention span is low. Human beings on an average, 7 minutes is our attention span. If you look at my sessions, I'm not sure how many of you have realized every 7 or 8 minutes, I have a question for all of you, or I break the discussion. Yeah, because that's our attention span as human beings. Okay, then it comes a filtering mechanism. How are we filtering the information? Then comes processing, retention, and storage in long-term memory. Yeah, but that's beyond the scope of the discussion in today's class. But what you all have to understand is VAK is not compartmentalized. VAK is something that will change over time. It is also dependent on your current job and current role that you are in and what you're currently focusing. So if you're somebody who's been writing a research paper, okay, the way your answers are today will be very different to if you're somebody who's on a field work and interviewing people. Your kinesthetic scores may be high at that point of time, but if you're writing a research paper and you've only been writing for the last 2-3 weeks and you do this test at that point of time, you could be more visual than anything else, right? So it's also circumstantial. But again, it won't differ that much. It will still be close to what your core strength is. Okay, have we got that? Can we move on? Have you understood, everyone? Rishabh, have I been able to clarify your doubt? Oral tradition has a lot of auditory component, but oral tradition also gives into imagination a lot. So when there's oral tradition and you're looking at oral tradition, remember, all of us imagine the stories differently. It's the same thing, right? When we read book, we all imagine characters differently. And then when we see them converted to a movie, a lot of us could be disappointed because the characters don't look like the way we thought they would be, right? So that's where our, our visualization is a different component altogether that comes in. Okay, so in communication, what is it? Important to remember. You're dealing with more than words, right? I'm dealing with emotions. The fact that some of you are getting so worried about a score being low, or does it mean what, how does it impact me? I'm constantly dealing with emotions when I'm talking to you, right? I'm dealing with perceptions. How are you looking at it? I'm not, like I said, I'm not compartmentalizing you. There's no right and wrong, right? But then we have our perceptions that we bring in when we communicate. We filter information. Okay, we have spent 40 minutes, right? In the last 40 minutes, we've spoken about VAK and communication. But some of you, if I have to stop right now and ask, what do you remember? Each of you will remember a different thing because we filter information differently. And then in communication, while communicating, always remember there's some amount of inattention. And it's common, there's nothing wrong. People lose track at times. So you have to, as a person who's communicating, always be cued in to that inattention and know that when are you losing your audience, how do you get them back, right? Perception and contextualization are two different processes by itself. When you hear someone, you have vivid and detailed images. You're a visualization person. Rishabh, you're visual. I don't know how that score said auditory, but just the way you're talking about it, you're very, very visual. You're listening to somebody speak and you immediately have images in your mind. That's a visual score. Yeah. Perception versus, would that be a part of filtering? Yes. So Janet, perception also impacts our, assumptions and our presumptions, right? So we perceive something, but then we also have assumptions about them and we make presumptions about them. Then based on our past experience, we could be contextualizing that information and then filtering it. So filtering comes a little later. Okay. Now, it may not happen like I'm saying ABCD. All this ABCD could be happening simultaneously in our head. Right? Again, it's completely about experience. For example, if I have a perception in my mind that literature students will mostly be visual learners. Okay, that's a perception I have in my mind. So if I'm teaching a group of literature student, I will somehow invariably contextualize my content to keep that in mind. Right? So automatically, what am I doing? I'm actually filtering the way I'm teaching. Janet, does that explain? Does that example help? Yes. Have you understood how our perceptions impact how we contextualize and then how we move on to filter information? Okay, and we are doing it all the time. Can you say that a person who is comfortable in audiovisual learning is more imaginative? Not necessarily. A person who is doing audiovisual learning could just be doing well with that learning aspect. Imagination is a little different, right? Imagination and creativity has a little different components to it. We spoke about creativity, right, Arunita? Creativity is a little different. So a creative person may not be strong visually or be strong in an audio perspective. A creative person could just be kinesthetic. Okay, or a creative person could have very mediocre scores in all three, but still be extremely creative. So creativity is not necessarily connected to this, to the way we learn. Everybody can be creative. Everybody can learn differently, right? Okay, let's have a look at this video. Tell me if you're able to hear it clearly. Are you able to hear? Soumya, you're visual.
Yeah, we can hear.
I don't know what your score shows, but you're visual and kinesthetic. Can you all hear? Some of you are saying yes, some of you are saying no. Poor sound quality. Hold on. Let me just stop sharing and reshare my screen. Give me a moment. I'm going to reshare the screen. Give me a second. Okay. I'll share sound here. Give me a second, please. So don't worry, watch this. This is more about watching, okay? Thoughts on the video, anybody? Yeah, it shows how what we communicate, right? How do we use words in communication? Apart from the fact that creative, emotional words matter a lot, right? It's also about how do you present that information. I could be talking to you about the same thing, right? But am I appealing to the emotional component in human beings? Am I one of the things I think in our poll was speaking with empathy, right? Empathy in the language, right? That empathy in that language becomes important. Apart from the fact that it's a very interestingly done video, right? Now, it's very, very important that the kind of words you use in communication, you do it the right way, okay? But it's also important that how do we express ourselves? And that's where effective communication has a couple of things we need to keep in mind. One is listening with empathy, right? I think when we first planned this course and we had the registrations coming in and we saw how you all interact in the initial couple of classes, I think my biggest thing was, am I able to answer your questions? Am I able, I constantly look at the chat, but then I'm like, okay, I shouldn't look distracted at the same time. But then it's important that we, look and we listen with empathy, right? Later, Kokila, you said later you perceived. Okay, right. I think the storytelling narrative is also like that, right? It gives a bit of suspense initially. So it's important for all of us, right? For all of us as researchers to listen with empathy. It's not always about us speaking, right? I obviously have an agenda for the class. I have things that I want to teach you all, okay, because we have a planned schedule. But at the end of the day, I always, try and make time and try and ensure that I have listened if there are concerns. So I see some of you who are constantly asking a question, and I know it's really a pressing issue for you. So I will address that. There are times when I may have missed it, right? And that's human error. Okay, but then that listening with empathy becomes important. Also understand communication begins with you. The way you communicate, the other person will mirror that communication. If you're kind, the other person will be kind. If you're polite, the other person will be polite. Sometimes you cannot control how the other person reacts, but then what's not in your control, you shouldn't worry about it. And we'll talk about that in the last class. Okay, the next thing, crisp communication requires preparation. I could be doing, I must have trained close to 10,000 people over the last few years. Okay, and a lot of my sessions have been on communication, but each time I do a segment on communication, I always prepare, right? I mean, I may have content ready, I put together the presentation. If I have a class on a Tuesday, my presentation is usually ready the week before, right? So during the weekend, I ensure my presentation's ready, and every Monday for a Tuesday class, I always sit, look back at the presentation again. I always make sure that I prepare. I see if I have questions when I look at the presentation. Okay, it's very, very important. And only then am I able to communicate crisply, right? Because I have so many of you. There's so many questions that come in. I have to be able to do that balancing act. Each of you will be in this position at some point and may have already been here, right? A lot of you may have already communicated with large groups, and you'll realize that the more prepared you are, the better and crisp is your communication. Anticipate the questions. I always make a list of questions in my mind. What can they ask? What could bug them? What could be a gap, right? Anticipate your questions when you're communicating. It's important. And if you don't know the answer to a question, say you don't know. I'll get back to you. Honest response is important. None of us know everything. So it's important for us to be honest. It's important for us to tell what's on our mind. And it's important for us to anticipate the questions. Compassionate communication fosters collaboration. Not only should I listen with empathy, but I should be compassionate, right? I should tell you that one of the first things I think I said is, this is a safe space. I wanted you all to interact, right? And I feel extremely happy with the amount of interaction that happens. And it's also because each of us are compassionate towards the other. We are listening. We're listening to queries being raised. We are finding our answers in somebody else's question. And that's compassionate communication. And that invariably, even though many of you are across institutes, some of you are from common institutes. As I'm looking at your assignments, I do realize that I have a large chunk of some students from some institutes. But then what I also realize is you all are collaborating across. You're listening to other people's questions. You're learning from each other. And that's effective communication. And finally, communication requires congruence of word and body. right? I cannot talk to you about something that's supposed to sound exciting, but then, my body language is dull. I'm low, I'm droopy shoulders. It doesn't work. I cannot give you a happy news without looking happy. I cannot give you a tragic news looking happy. It's not possible. There has to be congruence between what I'm speaking, how I'm speaking, how's my body language, my shoulders are up, am I smiling, are my eyebrows going up? I am by itself a very animated person, so I'm very expressive. But then all of us are not, and it's okay. But what's important is at least your general body language and your words have to be congruent, right? And that's where body language becomes a very important part of how effectively we communicate, right? As we began the session today, we looked at various learning styles, right? But what now we will look at is there's one way we learn, but there's also another way that we communicate, right? Now, you all may have done this communication style questionnaire. Did you all do this? Yes, no? Did we do this? Thank you. Some of you are very kind on the chat. We also need to learn to graciously take compliments. So thank you for that. Okay, so a lot of you have done that. Fantastic. Okay, so let's see what this means. Yeah. I have a couple of videos. Tell me if it's audible. All right. Okay, we'll come back to your styles. Don't worry about it. Let us first see examples. Meera, I want you to help me. I want you to help me with, if you all can hear the video. I'm going to play it.
Relax, Timon. Wait till everyone finds out you've been here all this time. And your mother. What will she think? She doesn't have to know. Nobody has to know. Of course. Everyone thinks you're dead. They do? Yeah. Scar told us.
Sorry, I'm going to just go back and play that. I was
about the stampede. He did? Relax, Timon. Wait till everyone finds out you've been here all this time. And your mother. What will she think? She doesn't have to know. Nobody has to know. Of course they do. Everyone thinks you're dead. They do? Yeah. Scar told us about the stampede. He did? What else did he tell you? What else matters? You're alive. And that means you're the king. King? Lady, have you got your lions crossed?
King, your majesty, I grovel at your feet.
Stop it. It's not gravel, it's grovel. And don't. He's not the king. Are you? No. Simba? No, I'm not the king. Maybe I was gonna be, but that was a long time ago. Let me get this straight. You're the king? And you never told us? Look, I'm still the same guy. But with power. Could you guys excuse us for a few minutes? Hey, whatever she has to say, she can say in front of us. Right, Simba? Maybe you better go. It starts. You think you know a guy.
Okay, so here what we see that being very passive, right? Simba is, not sure that if he wants to tell everybody. People have seen the movie? Yes, no? People have seen the movie Lion King. Yeah, many of us may have seen it. This is the newer version, I think. Okay, and here Simba is not very sure. So you see that Simba is being very, very passive in communication, right? So Simba is not telling exactly what's on the mind. Simba is like, what, I'm not sure, maybe not. Okay, so Simba is going through that entire, it's like a confusion in the mind. And Simba is being passive in the communication style. So Simba is not really being forthright, not really putting his thoughts across. So that's where this is like communicating in a passive manner. Let's look at the next video.
Relaxed.
Okay, now this video is again from a very famous movie, okay, called Moana. Okay, I have used mostly animation. Let's. I hope some of you have at least seen it, but let's look at this.
Not true.
Without my hook, I am nothing.
We're only here because you stole the heart in the first place.
No, we're here because the ocean told you you're special and you believed it.
I am Moana of Motunui. You will board my boat.
Goodbye, Moana.
Sail across the sea.
I'm not killing myself so you could prove you're something
and
you're not.
restore the heart of Te-Fiti. The ocean chose me.
It chose wrong.
Can anyone this aggressive communication? This is from the movie Moana. Can anybody tell me why is this aggressive communication? Quickly. We often think aggression is only about shouting, it's only about raising your voice, right? But why is this aggressive communication? Because you're not listening to the other person. That's point one. The second thing is you're losing the cool, you're wanting to control, okay? And you're constantly making it about yourself. Aggressive communication is also about that, right? Rishabh, it can be assertive when we move on and look at the next thing after kind of, they solve the problem and they go to the mountain of Tahiti. After that, I think the communication moves to being assertive and persuasive. But here, what is happening is each of them are trying to find their thing. You don't know the exact reason why the other person is behaving. At times, people are aggressive because of that. You're being forceful, yeah. So each of them, Moana and Maui, were both being forceful in the way they were talking, and they were only talking about themselves. And that's why this is more an aggressive communication than anything else. Let us look at the last. I will tell you how to interpret your own style. Okay.
Didn't your mother ever tell you not to play with your food?
What do you want?
I'm here to announce that King Mufasa's on his way. So you'd better have a good excuse for missing the ceremony this morning.
Oh, now look, Zazu, you made me lose my lunch.
Ha! You'll lose more than that when the king gets through with you. He's as mad as a hippo with a hernia.
Ooh, I quiver with fear.
Now, Scar, don't look at me that way. Help!
Scar. Drop him.
Impeccable timing, Your Majesty.
Why, if it isn't my big brother descending from on high to mingle with the commoners?
Sarabi and I didn't see you at the presentation of Simba.
That was today? Oh, I feel simply awful. Must have slipped my mind.
Yes, well, as slippery as your mind is, as the king's brother, you should have been first in line.
Well, I was first in line, until the little hairball was born.
That hairball is my son, and your future king.
Oh, I shall practice my curtsy.
Don't turn your back on me, Scar.
Oh, no, Mufasa. Perhaps you shouldn't turn your back on me.
Is that a challenge?
Temper. I wouldn't dream of challenging you.
Pity. Why not?
Well, as far as brains go, I got the lion's share, but when it comes to brute strength, I'm afraid I'm at the shallow end of the gene pool.
All right. Simba's father, okay, talking to his uncle Scar. Okay, now Scar is very angry, right? That at Simba's coronation, but Scar does not want to show the anger, right? And he says that, as you wish or as you do. So he's trying to be sarcastic. Passive aggressive is a lot about that. So your aggression is all in the mind, but in your communication verbally, you're passive. You're not confronting the person. Okay, now passive aggression, aggressive behavior also has its disadvantages, which we'll talk about in a while. Let us look at the
Zazu,
Yes, sire?
take Nala home. I've got to teach my son a lesson.
Come, Nala. Simba, good luck.
Simba! Simba, I'm very disappointed in you.
I know.
You could have been killed. You deliberately disobeyed me. And what's worse, you put Nala in danger.
I was just trying to be brave like you.
I'm only brave when I have to be. Simba, being brave doesn't mean you go looking for trouble.
But you're not scared of anything.
I was today.
You were?
Yes. I thought I might lose you.
Oh. I guess even kings get scared, huh?
Mm-hmm.
But you know what?
What?
I think those hyenas were even scarier.
After Simba and Nala have gone to the place where the hyenas are there, and Simba's father is obviously worried that they put themselves in danger, and he's talking about it, right? So there is a point he's making, but he's being assertive in the way he's communicating. But let us now also further understand why do these videos fall in those respective categories. When you look at communication, okay, and the style that each of us communicate in, there are 4 styles. Okay, we'll first look at what this quadrant means, and then we will look at your individual scores. Okay, and I also want to understand how, if you all have any questions, we will take that at that point. Okay, now when you're communicating, there are 2 things. One is, what is the thought that you're giving to somebody else, right? How much are you thinking about somebody else? That's X. On the y-axis, we have put the directness of your communication. How direct are you? How blunt are you in saying what's on your mind? Okay. Now, there are some people who, while communicating, are only thinking about themselves, right? The aggression, where you're not thinking about, the other person. You're not thinking about their emotion. You're not thinking about their stake. For you, in your mind, it's about, I need to win this conversation. I need to get my way. So it's I win, you lose. At that point, communication becomes aggressive by nature. Okay. Then you have the other extreme, which is passive, wherein you are completely worried what will the other person think, and you want them to, you want to placate them, you want them to be happy. So you constantly talk about, okay, it's, what, you win, I lose, it doesn't matter. So you're passive, you give in to the communication, you give in to unreasonable demands. A lot of times, I think as research scholars, we have all had moments when we have been passive in communication with our seniors, with maybe professors, guides. A lot of times we give in, right? And that's passive communication. Being passive can be harmful because you're not putting yourself and your goals first, right? So being passive constantly can be very, very harmful to self. Being aggressive constantly can also be harmful because you're harming your interpersonal relationships around you. If you're constantly aggressive, it doesn't help in the long run. Then you have the other side, which is a little more dangerous than both aggressive and passive, actually. The passive aggressive, where the anger is in your mind, but when you're speaking, you're very sweet. But in your head, you're like, okay, I'm going to win this and just see how I do it, right? But passive aggressive is problematic because when you're communicating passive aggressively, it's very, very confusing to somebody, right? So in your head, you're angry, but then you're being nice to the person. But at the end of the day, your actions are of anger. Even though your communication is sweet, your actions are of anger. And because of that, passive aggressive can actually cause a lot of internal stress to people who are expressing themselves like that. Okay, so if you had to ask me of one form of communication that's not very helpful, I would say the passive aggressive, because it often leads to people burning out. It leads to people experiencing a lot of internal stress. It's not really good on relationships also. The ideal way to communicate, okay, is assertive, wherein I listen to you, I tell you what I'm thinking. At the same time, I understand where you're coming from. So I'm assertive in my communication. Okay. Now, when we look at influencing in the third class, we will also look at some of the assertive techniques. And how can you be more assertive? We will do that. We'll look at some bit of persuasion. But in assertion, it's about, okay, let both of us find a midway. It's just like negotiating, right? While negotiating, you want to be collaborative because it's a win-win for both the people. Similarly, assertive communication is that you put your point across strongly, but then you do not raise your voice. You do it very calmly, and you make sure that everybody's thoughts are heard. Now, why is this kind of communication important? Because this kind of communication often seeps into our writing. Like I said, when we do argumentative component of the writing, we should not be too aggressive. Neither should we be too passive, right? We looked at argumentative styles, correct? So we have to be assertive in the way we write and in the way we present and the way we communicate. When you have an audience and you're presenting your paper, if people ask you questions which are uncomfortable, do not be aggressive, point one. Second thing, don't be passive. Don't ignore. It will be like you're not interested. The third thing, don't be passive aggressive. So in your head, you're, kind of bombasting the person. You're being very mean to the person in your head, but you're like, oh, I get the question. Yes, that's very good. That's very good, right? That's passive aggressive. All these three don't work. When you're presenting, it's okay to be assertive. Like I said, if you don't know an answer, tell them, I'll get back to you. I don't know the answer. Right? That's assertive communication. You're putting your point across. You're doing it politely. You're not being rude to people. Okay. Now, what we'll do is let us look at your scores. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen for a moment, and I'm going to get to the space where I can see all of you. Okay. X-axis, oh, sorry, Ahmed, you couldn't see the x-axis. X-axis is how much thought you give to somebody else, right? It's more about empathy. It's about how much thought that you give to somebody else. Okay, I see a lot of questions here. So what we are going to do is, Mira, because this component is important, we're going to see if there are some questions, okay, which we can take here on this particularly about communication style, and then I'll move on and do the effective component of the session today.
Absolutely. So if there are any questions, you can all raise your hands or put it up in the chat box and we'll take them. Any questions, anyone? You know how to raise your hands?
Yeah, I saw a question from Janet, which says, if someone says that the other person is being aggressive while talking, obviously it means that I don't feel heard, right? If you are constantly being aggressive, you're only telling your point, you're not giving me a chance, I feel that I'm not heard. And that's a repercussion of aggressive communication. It's also the fact that I may not then want to communicate. So I block off. I'm not listening to you at a point if you're being too aggressive with me, right? So you can't reach out. Communication gets completely blocked at that point.
Kokila has a question, ma'am, and Pragya. Yeah. So Pragya, I will unmute you and maybe you can go ahead with your question. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much. And it was a mind-blowing session. Thank you so much, ma'am.
It is Pragya, we still have 40 minutes of the session to go.
No, but this component of, because this is not only research, but this is real life things that we, come across on day-to-day basis. Similarly, my question is based on day-to-day life thing that, like in organizations, suppose the leadership it has this pattern of aggressive communication, and due to habituation out of that conditioning, the followers, the teammates develop that passive communication style or passive aggressive communication style. Now how to and that assertive communication is not appreciated. So how can we propose to change
that?
Yeah, break that.
Okay. So, Pragya, if your leader is being aggressive, firstly is you need to take a stand back and you need to make it clear that aggressive communication is not appreciated. Okay. It's not easy, but like I said, on the last session, I will do some persuasion and assertion techniques with all of you, which will show how to break aggressive communication. Right? For example, one of the things is if somebody is being very aggressive, what do? You first listen out to them. You let them vent. You let them take out their anger. Because when people are angry, they're often not rational, right? So at that point, arguing back with them does not solve the problem at all. So you have to do, so what we call in assertion is a technique called fogging. So you're like, yeah, okay, I'm listening. Yeah, you're not saying anything, you're not committing to anything, but you let the anger simmer down first. And once you do that, then you put across your point assertively. And you don't have to cover down, you don't have to be passive to put your point across. But unfortunately, what happens in workplaces is leaders are aggressive, team members often think it's okay to be aggressive, and what it creates is a toxic culture. So that's a different problem altogether. And you cannot be aggressive and get your work done in an organization for a long term, right? It's not a badge of honor you wear to say I'm aggressive, right? It has a lot of repercussions in workplace. It impacts interpersonal skills, it impacts relationships, it impacts productivity, it impacts employee engagement. In an organization, it has large impacts. So you cannot be aggressive. So one of the ways is fogging, where you calm down the person first, and then you say what's on your mind. And along with fogging, you use something called the broken record, which is like a gramophone. When it's stuck, it makes the same noise. So you tell your point across, you repeat it, but you do it very calmly till the person listens. So there are two assertion techniques you can use if somebody is aggressive on the other end. That's one way to quickly break it down. Yeah. Okay. All right. We have a question from Nisha Meera. If you can read it out. My chat box is getting a little this, so I am not able to read out the entire question.
Right. I'll read it out next, ma'am. Can we just go to Kanchan's question right now?
Yeah.
Kanchan, asking you to unmute. Go ahead with your question.
Yes, Kanchan.
Thank you for this wonderful session. With communication, you can understand either you are a good communicator or you are not. So the one thing I want, as a research scholar, when you're writing down, it's most of the time a one-way communication. So how being a good communicator is very specific to being a research scholar.
Okay. Okay, that's very simple, Kanchan. When you write a paper, you write it as a scholar, as a writer. Then I want you to read it as a reader. Right? So when you write your paper, you're writing it from your perspective, from what you have understood, what your results are showing, what is your gap. So you're doing it very academically, right? And that's why peer reviews become important. So what am I saying? Let's take the example of validity, right? Why do we do construct validity? Why do we do content validity? So that the question that you're asking, the other person has understood it the same way that you have asked it, correct? So in writing, that's one way to ensure that what you want to communicate is what is being understood. So get more people to read your writing, right? If not too many people, because there's a privacy issue, you don't want to, it's not being published. So at least have one or two people who can actually read, or you have to read it with a third mind, which means don't read it on the day you have written. Take like a 1 day, 2 day gap, and then come back and read your paper. And see that as an audience, what are my questions that are coming up? What is it? Is the author being too aggressive in putting their point across? Right? Is the author not being, the entire thing of compassion, the entire thing of empathy in writing, the entire thing of unity and consideration, right? Are those components being met? Those are the basics of writing. So as a research scholar, that's why communication becomes important even in writing and the way you write it, right? So when you're citing somebody else's work, are you being polite about it or are you being rude about it? Are you presenting it like, what this person says, there's but, right? How you say the but, how you say the other side of the picture is also important, right? You can't say but and however and make your language sound like it's always conflicting. So that's where communication becomes important even in writing as a scholar. I hope that helps. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, ma'am. Nisha's is more of a comment.
Okay.
She says, I don't communicate well. I usually shy away from conflicts. But when I do my point across, I say what I have to say, and I'm usually not diplomatic, which my near ones have said isn't good. But my results in the assessment leans towards me being an assertive communicator with 17 and aggressive being 11. This was surprising.
Okay. Nisha, you are assertive. So you say things, you don't have to like conflict. A lot of us don't like conflicts. That's a completely different thing. So you are a person who doesn't like conflict, but given a point where you have to make a point, say something, you say it, right? And you don't have to be diplomatic. Whoever tells you being diplomatic is good is just somebody who's trying to run away, Diplomacy has its benefits, but diplomacy doesn't work all the time. Diplomacy and honesty don't really go hand in hand. Okay. So people can choose to be diplomatics, Okay, but then it's a very, very personal choice. You don't have to be diplomatic. You say what's on your mind, and that's assertive as long as you're not screaming, you're not banging your hand, you're not walking out of a room. Your aggressive score is low because you're not behaving aggressively. So I don't see any problem with Nisha how you're reacting, and it's perfectly all right not to like conflicts. But put in a conflict situation because your score is assertive, I'm sure you'll find a way out. Right? And you will do it assertively. You will speak your mind. Maybe you'll need a little more time to convince somebody, but that's absolutely okay. I don't see it as a problem at all. Okay. Is there anything else?
So we have Aditi Devi's question. While we may be one kind of person, it depends on the person we are dealing with, right?
True.
Aggressive person, we can't help but be passive.
Yeah.
So is that right or wrong?
So if somebody is very aggressive on the other end, you have to be assertive. Being passive doesn't work. They'll walk all over you. You know, figuratively, right? So if somebody is being aggressive, you have to be assertive in response. Okay, but to initially bring down that aggression, you'll have to be calm, and then you'll have to put your points across. If you're passive, then the person is going to take you for granted all the time, and you've got yourself into a vicious cycle of aggression, passive, aggressive, passive communication. Then that's problematic. Okay.
And a question from Rishabh as to how to sound assertive at the same time be forthright.
Assertive is about being forthright, Rishabh. Assertive is about saying what's on your mind, but saying it politely, saying it calmly, saying it with facts and figures. For example, a lot of us find it difficult to say no. How many of you find it difficult to say no? Quickly show a thumb or whatever. How many of you? Yeah, I find it difficult to say no all the time. I teach people how to say no, but I find it difficult to say no. Okay, so why do we find it difficult to say no, and how do you assertively say no? So say no, find an alternative solution to that, and also have your reason on why you're saying no. Your reason has to be justified. And similarly, you will have to find a solution for the person. So if you're saying no, it happens a lot of work, right? You want to say no because somebody is dumping work on you. So learn to say no, find an alternative solution for the person. Say, you know what, I can't do it, but maybe somebody else can help. Or, you know, two of us can handle this responsibility. So you're not directly saying no, but you're telling the person that it's difficult for you to take it on because you don't have the bandwidth for it. So saying no with a solution attached to it is assertive communication. But saying no and running away is passive communication. And saying no and screaming your lungs out is aggressive communication. So the same no can be said in different ways to make it more effective. Yeah. We often, it's a very cultural thing, people. We find it often hard to say no to people senior to us. It's very, very cultural. It's very Indian. Okay. You can be blunt. There's nothing called soft blunt, Rishabh. You're either blunt or you're not. And it's okay to be blunt in some situations. It's not aggressive as long as you're not shouting and demeaning the other person. It's assertive communication. Sorry, Meera, you were saying something.
No, I was just saying we have another question. So please go on, ma'am.
Anything else?
Can we? Okay. So Dhriti Mittal has a question. Dhriti, trying to unmute you. Dhriti, are you there? Okay, I think meanwhile, probably we can take Sharmishta's question.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Sharmisha. Sharmisha, your passive aggressive is 17. What's your next highest? I don't know if she's responded. Sharmisha, what's your next highest?
Yes, my next highest is actually I have highest score. My highest score is 17, and that's in two categories: passive and passive aggressive.
Oh, then you're largely passive, Sharmisha. So which means even if you have difficulty, you don't talk about it, or even if you're angry, your anger is all in the head, which means people around you currently are very aggressive. That's why your response is falling in those two categories, especially with such high scores. People around you are maybe is my assumption, very pushy, very aggressive right now. And you're finding this an easy way to deal with it. So you'll have to reflect. No easy answer. You'll have to reflect and see, can you become assertive with them?
Yes, my assertive score is 10. And I want to improve upon that category.
So you need to speak what's on your mind, Sharmishtha. Because right now, if you're passive and passive aggressive is at 17, which means internally there's a lot of conflict you're going through. And you'll have to first solve that, because otherwise you're dealing with a lot of stress internally and you're not seeking help for it.
Okay. Talk to somebody. I just wanted to, thank you, ma'am. But I just wanted to know, is it always, I mean, if I do not seek assistance, because I want to be self-reliant, I want to do everything on my own, not taking anyone's help. Is that bad?
No, it's not. As long as you're not burning out in the process, it's not bad. But if you're burning out in the process, then I think you will have to reflect and see, it's okay to take help, no, Sharmishta? It doesn't make us any lesser. It's okay to seek help. But like you're saying, if I can push myself and do it, why should I take help? I agree with that sentiment. I think that's something a lot of researchers go through. We want to be self-reliant, right? We want to hold the world on our shoulders. It's a very self-grandiose thing that all of us go through. If anybody tells you they've not been through it, they're lying to you. We want to solve the world's problems. We want to be the first ones to do it. We want to do everything on our own, right? It's a phase that people go through, and I'm hoping that you're able to understand your own body cues and emotional cues. As long as it's not affecting you emotionally and physically, I think you're doing all right. But if you think you're losing sleep, you're getting stressed about it, then it's something you'll have to reflect upon.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Some of you have questions on aggression. Okay, where does defensiveness fall? Defensiveness is it's a defense mechanism, Ashita. It could be different things. You could be displacing emotion. You could be projecting emotion. That's a completely different category altogether. Okay. Now, what I want you all to remember is this. Look at your highest score and your second highest. If they have a difference of 2, then the top 2 things add together how you communicate most times. Okay, so if you have a 17 and a 15, 17 and a 14, that 2-3 difference, those are your top 2 styles. Okay, so some of us may have one single style which is very high. So we get 17, then we get 11, 12, 10 in the rest. That's possible. Okay, but then that means that one single style is our primary style, but most of us will get a combination of 2 things. So look at what your top 2 scores are and understand what it is. So your second score is usually what you know. When you're in a conflict situation, you revert to your second style because that's your defense mechanism. Like somebody said, defensiveness. Whatever is your second style is what you revert to in a state of conflict. So I could be assertive as my main style, but my second style could be passive aggressive. That is what happens to me when I'm pushed to a corner. Right? So most of in the communication style questionnaire, the second style is what we do when we are in a conflict situation. The first style is what we do, which is our generic communication style. Okay. All right. So I'm going to move on from here. I'm going to reshare my screen and go back to the presentation. Okay. If there are more questions, we'll take it later then. Is that okay, Meera? Okay. All right. So we looked at the communication, but then let's look at what are the things that, make communication more effective. A couple of more things, right? 3 important things to keep in mind. Reflective listening, right? We spoke about listening with empathy, but what is reflective listening? It is about if there is a misunderstanding, if there is a conflict, get to the core of it, right? And understand what's happening. Reflective listening is what? I listen to you. I reflect back what you're feeling, what you're thinking, what you're going through. That's reflective listening, right? One is hearing. Hearing is just there. Then is listening, and then is reflective listening. For communication to be effective, you have to listen and you will have to reflect. I have to reflect the body language emotionally. I have to reflect what I'm understanding through words. The next thing is effective inquiry. Inquiry is what? Inquiry is about asking questions. Now, some of you have put it here saying that your first score is say 15 and 12 or 19 and 13. 19 and 13, Nagashri, that's a huge difference. So you're primarily assertive. Ritushri, you're assertive. Passive is your second thing. In moments of conflict, you become passive. Yes, these two change during conflict. That's exactly what I'm saying. That your first style is what's primarily your general communication style, but your second style is what is like your armor, like your defense mechanism when you're in a conflict situation. And then it could change. Okay, effective inquiry. Inquiry is about asking questions. When you effectively ask enough questions, you remove assumptions. The fact that we have the chat open, the fact that you're constantly asking questions, what are we doing? What have we put in as a mechanism? We have put in effective inquiry so that there are no assumptions and then no presumptions. So there's no misunderstanding of what has been taught. The last thing is rephrasing, repeating and restating what I have understood, what you have told me, how have I understood it, right? When you all say something, I often rephrase it and tell it back to you. These 3 skills are very, very important if you want to effectively communicate, right? Reflect and listen, inquire effectively, and rephrase in your communication. But what are basic essentials? I'm going to relook at that again. Okay, essentials of communication: clear, organize your information when you're speaking. Don't have ambiguity, just like in your writing, even while you speak, don't have ambiguity. Don't give conflicting information to people. So I can't tell you at a point that aggression is good, and at another point, I can't tell you that, assertive is what you should aim at. It's not. My stance is very clear. Aggression doesn't work. Aggression is a temporary solution that some people can take on in their communication, but aggression doesn't work. Assertion is what we should all look at, what we should all aim for. Be concise, cut out the fluff. If any of you have to go back and you have to, Google on communication, effective communication, there is a plethora of information. When I'm teaching in class, it's very important that I cut out fluff for all of you, right? I only give you things that's important. There has to be quick access to the components that we're looking at. I talk about only important points, given that I have 2 hours and I have so much to cover. Okay, your communication, one of the essentials is it has to be compelling. I have to be able to grab your attention. I have you all with me for 10 sessions. For me, each session could be a different topic, but each time I'll have to find ways so that I can grab your attention, so that I know you're listening. I know you're there. I know you're interacting. And there has to be enthusiasm, because if I show enthusiasm in class, I will mirror enthusiasm. You will react back enthusiastically to me. If I had to sit here, do this, I'd say, our communication has to be very, very compelling. You're going to react like that. Right? So our body language, everything has to be, essentially, it has to be basic. It has to be compelling. It has to have that enthusiasm. Okay? Catalytic, which means a call to action. Every class I have asked you questions. I have given you something to think about. I've asked you to reflect. What am I doing? My communication is calling to action. Each time you learn something, I ask you back on it. I ask you to share examples. I ask you to relate incidents, the ethics thing, right? I asked you all to tell me incidents that have happened. That's a call to action. That's when there is a catalytic effect. What is a catalyst, right, in chemistry? What is a catalyst? Anybody? Put it on chat quickly. What is a catalyst? It aids the reaction. It's an agent, correct? Similarly, while communicating, what is my catalytic thing? That I tell you something, then I ask you about it. I do a call for action. The call for action could be anything. The poll is a call for action, right? Asking you all questions, asking you to type something on the chat is a call for action, right? That's how you make communication essential, communication important, communication reflective, right? Contextual. I have to contextualize my sessions, right? With you all, the challenges that you all are from multiple disciplines, but also the advantages that you all from multiple disciplines, because I get to hear, each of us get to hear multiple perspectives. So for me, when I contextualize, when I create the content for these sessions, I keep it at a very, very generic level, right? But I know that at any point of time, I can ask any of you, your students from philosophy, from geology, your students from literature, your students from social sciences, right? I have students from across, I have students from ecology, right? Some of you are from pure sciences, some of you are from journalism, okay? So I know that while I can speak a few generic things, I also contextualize some of the examples, keeping your backgrounds in mind. And I know that I can call you all to action to give me more examples. So these become very essential when I'm communicating. But then a few more things, right? We looked at reflective listening, we looked at effective inquiry, okay? We looked at rephrasing, but a few more things to make it even more effective. One is controlled emotion, right? A lot of times, while you have to be empathetic in communication, make sure we don't go overboard with emotions, right? I have to be able to hold on to the reins of emotions, even when I'm showing you all something, right? I could be showing you videos on aggression, which can really churn emotions in people, right? So I, as a facilitator, have to be very careful. How am I making my communication effective and yet not disturbing you through the way I'm communicating? It has to be focused. Like I said, every session has to be crisp, every session has to be concise, every session has to be focused. I plan, I know exactly how my 2 hours are going to be. I plan them in time pockets. So 20 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. My session plans are like that in my head. And it's important for all of us. It's important for you all as researchers when you're present to plan your content. We go back to coherent body language, right? Verbal, non-verbal has to be coherent. On your listeners, pause. Like I said, every 7 minutes, there's a gap. I ask you questions. I ask you to tell me something. I have to pick your interest. And finally, enabling visibility, right? We all spoke about learning styles, but there's also visibility. Are you able to imagine what I'm imagining? Do we read the same poem and do we think of it the same way? Okay, there's a very beautiful poem by Shel Silverstein. Meera, if you can just put it on chat for me later, personally, maybe I will get that poem and share it with you all in the next class. And it's a beautiful poem on communication and perspective. Okay, Meera, I hope you can hear me. Yes, I can't see the chat. Yeah. Don't worry about the slide being unclear. I have used yellow. I'm not sure if that's a problem here. Okay, okay, Meera, I saw the share. Thank you so much. Right. So I will be sending you all notes on this. So don't worry about it. As long as you're listening, you will get this in the handout later on. Okay. The next thing that we're going to look at is what are the barriers of communication, right? Barriers of communication are many, unfortunately. Okay, one is physical barrier. Now, in a virtual communication, in an online class, this is something that we are dealing with, right? There is external noise at times. Okay, some of our seating arrangements may not be comfortable. In fact, there are times when I want to just get up, sit back, right? But I try not to do it too commonly, right? It's not, times of physical barriers today are also about our internet going off, our bandwidth being low. Okay, so these have become physical barriers right now. But if you had to talk face to face, a lot of times physical barriers, right? You have to go somewhere else to talk to somebody. Language can be a barrier, but again, it's how you see it. Accent, language, jargon. Okay, jargon is something that we should avoid. If you want to communicate effectively, don't use jargons all the time. Speak in a language that everybody understands. Speak in a language that's commonplace. Your vocabulary has to be good, but it doesn't have to have jargons which people don't understand. Right? Speaking good English, communicating well is about reaching out to people. Right? The next thing is accent. A lot of times I have been asked in my communication session, ma'am, I have an accent. So I tell them that if the accent is very heavy and if the person opposite you is not able to understand, they will ask you to repeat it, right? If they have a problem. Otherwise, don't assume that your accent is a problem because we come from vernaculars. Our vernacular accents are very strong. And some of us do have an accent, right? As long as it's not affecting business communication where somebody's completely not able to understand you, then you will have to maybe work a bit on and get trained on accent. But otherwise, it's really not a problem. Languages are different, okay? Languages become barriers only when we make them barriers. Otherwise, language is a very facilitating element. The next thing, information overload. Like I said, too much of information, right? Even when we planned the course, there's so much we wanted to do, but we had to make sure that there is no information overload. We cover only 3-4 components in a particular session and we move on from there. Poor listening. Like I said, people can get distracted, right? How do I make sure there's clarity? How do I make sure you're retaining what you're speaking? That's why we do the handouts after every session. So that what I speak, what I talk about, I also put some basic information back at the handout. I'm not sure how many of you go back and read the handouts. Yeah, I'm hoping at least a small number does. But then what we are doing is it's to help you with retention. Shortage of time. A lot of times communication gets impacted because we don't have enough time, right? Or there is assumption-based reasoning. You know, I'm not worried about it. I've just made an assumption and I've responded. Emotional responses. Am I reacting to your questions or am I actually responding to it? Right? That makes a difference. When you're asking me a question, how am I reacting? When you're asking each other questions, how are we reacting? A lot of times people have asked questions and some of you have volunteered information and helped people out with resources, right? And that's a great emotional response. That's a great space to be in and communicate well. A lot of times in these sessions, there have been questions on beliefs and values, and we have tried to keep away from it. Even though there's a cultural component in communication, which impacts how we communicate, it's important to keep personal beliefs and values out of communication, right? Because a lot of times our personal beliefs come from our experiences and our perceptions, and they can be very, very strong. Okay, so especially in a multidisciplinary class like this, I keep personal beliefs and values a little away. I don't discuss them. Okay, selective perception. A lot of times our prejudices and our stereotypes impact communication. So if I had to come to the session with prejudices that, you know what, people from this discipline are going to be like that, people from that discipline are going to be like that, I'm already bringing my biases to it and I'm alienating participants. So while communicating, it's important. Similarly, as researchers, when you go for conferences, when you're presenting your paper, now if you're presenting your paper in a niche conference, which is about your work, you can use those jargons because you're meeting people of your kind. Okay, but if you're going to a conference that's a little more generic in your area, then you have to understand how to do it. And don't go with the prejudice that only people who understand my work are smart enough. A lot of times, we have researchers who come up with these kind of biases, which is very, very unconscious, but it's there. Okay, every researcher is doing work that's important to them. And every field and domain have their own importance. The next thing, a lot of times communication barriers happen because there are complex organizational hierarchies, right? In academic institutions, in organizations, the hierarchies become very complex, and that can create a barrier in communication. But then there are ways to work around those barriers too. And finally, a lot of times when people don't speak what's on their mind, silence and lying is a big barrier to communication. I have a lot of problems. I'm always worried when people are very quiet, because I think they're thinking something and they're not speaking about it. Or if people are lying, that's worse. It's one of the worst barriers of communication. Okay, the last component for today, which is your, do we have any questions? Do any of you have any other barrier that you feel I have not added here, but which you think is a barrier? Keshav, if you are an engineer, if your thesis is in the engineering domain, you have to use language that's in your domain. Meera, somebody said that the letters seem distorted in the slides.
Yeah, that's right, ma'am. It's a little distorted.
I am not sure why that's happening. Do not worry. I'm going to send you this material. I'm not sure what's happening, because on my end it looks perfectly clear. But I will keep that in mind. Okay, I will send you all handouts, so don't worry. You're going to get the information that we are discussing. Cultural barriers, yeah, cultural barriers can also be a thing. So wherein we all already assume that people. But give me an example. The ones who have said cultural barriers, give me an example. Give me an example of cultural barriers. I see 2 or 3 of you who have mentioned it. What do you mean by cultural barriers in communication? I think Anvesha, you're one person. There's somebody else. Archana Nair, you have spoken of cultural norms. Like touching elders' feet, difficult saying no to somebody senior if that's being expected. What we mean and what's understood. Yeah. Sridhar, I'll come to your question. Just hold that thought. So a lot of times cultural barriers are there. And I think we will have to navigate that slowly. So it's like this. I'm from a culture where touching elders' feet is considered a source of respect. But I, for a long time, have not touched an elder's feet whom I don't respect, because I think respect is something that needs to be earned. And I may be teaching the same thing to my child. But cultural barriers like that take time. It takes a lot of people to bring together. It's like a collective action, and only then does that barrier get taken care of. It doesn't happen. It's not just a generation gap, but it's a mindset which people across generations carrying it out. Americans are very cut and short in business. Asian culture is too sugar-coated. Rishabh, that's because we are high and low context cultures. So I'm going to quickly spend 2 minutes on talking about this, because some of you have spoken about that. I also had one thing. Sridhar, I'm going to get to your thing, Sridhar, how to differentiate between being silent and not speaking up? So Sridhar, some people are silent by personality, so they're quiet, right? But given a thing wherein people are asking you questions and asking for your opinion, if you don't speak up, then that's problematic, is what I meant. I don't mean I have a problem if people are quiet, but if you're in a close meeting with small group of people, right? And if people are asking you questions and asking for your opinion, but you don't want to say what's in your mind, then that becomes a barrier of communication. Okay, now the entire thing of culture, right? Let's look at this. So India is a high context culture, which basically means that our communication, our understanding of space and time is very, very people oriented. We are very relationship focused, right? We are a collectivist culture. Our communication has a lot of non-verbal component. Our communication is very, very, we talk a lot. There's a lot we kind of say one thing. Okay, so that's a very high context culture. Low context culture, like the Americans, like some of the European cultures, very curt, very to the point. They find it easier to say no. Their communication is very, very direct. They only expect answers to questions they ask, right? But a lot of times, we being from a high context culture, we will not only answer the question they have asked, but we'll give a lot of extra information, right? And that's a cultural difference. Okay, like some of you have said, yes, American professors prefer being called by their first or their last name, but in India, you have to say sir or ma'am. I had a senior who was a couple of months senior to me in PhD, and who was annoyed because I called him by the name. Okay, Janet, that is gender barrier. That is because the expectation is women don't understand equipments and what are they doing here. So that's culture and gender, right? So that kind of a cultural context becomes very, very important in how we communicate. And yes, this is something that you all have to understand. A lot of you who may go to do higher studies, your postdocs, or may work in universities which are in countries which are low context, you will see that you will have to change the way you communicate. So you can't go there and expect your peers to call you sir or ma'am. You will have to understand that they will call you by your first name. And it's a cultural thing. There's no disrespect in it. But these are things that you will have to understand. Can introverted people be assertive? Yes, you can be assertive. Yeah, introverted people are in fact very, very strongly assertive at times. The person who got offended by me was obviously an Indian. Okay, all right. So let's look at the last segment today, okay, which is your advocacy and inquiry. Okay, like I say, I come back. These are components of effective communication, very, very important. Advocacy is stating one's views. It is telling you what I think, how I feel, what's my judgment on this. And I'm asking you for a course of action. Okay, and at times I could be giving an order. These are all forms of advocacy. But as a researcher, what is your advocacy? When you're speaking about your topic, you have to be confident about what you're stating. Right? If you're giving facts and figures, you know what you're stating and you're telling your views. You're also expressing your judgment. So if you're critiquing a particular paper, you're doing it. You're expressing your judgment with that understanding that you have looked at the data clearly, right? So that's advocacy, stating your viewpoint. Inquiry is asking questions. As a researcher, while communicating, if you are advocating your point, you have to be also open to inquiry from the other side. People will ask you questions and you have to be open to that inquiry. And you can only leverage and improve your communication when you do both advocacy and inquiry well. You yourself have to ask yourself questions. You have to inquire within. When you're doing a research work, when you're writing a paper, when you're going to present it, ask yourself questions. Like I said, ask questions. What do you think the questions can come from the audience, right? Inquire within and be open to inquiry. Only then will you also advocate well. But then how do you draw a balance between them? Right? A lot of times, as researchers when presenting, you will see that some people are constantly asking questions, right? There's a constant inquiry. It becomes more like an interrogation at a point of time, right? And if you have somebody from the audience who's only asking you questions and trying to put you in a difficult spot while you're presenting, it's okay to kind of, at times it's okay to answer one or two of their questions and then tell them, why don't we take this offline? That's a very polite way to say. Yeah, let's discuss this later. Let's take this up in the tea break, right? Now, that becomes interviewing and interrogating. Then there are some people from the audience, you will notice, who are constantly talking about what they think about your topic. Have you come across this? Yes, no, sometimes? Where people are constantly telling you what they think about your topic or what is their experience, right? It's quite common. Now, that becomes imposing at a point of time because they are constantly only explaining it. All right. And it's very, very common. It can be very, very annoying. So that's a high advocacy from your audience. Okay. Then you will have a set of audience. Okay. I'm now looking at it from the audience perspective. You'll have a set of audience who are neither asking you questions, nor are they sharing what they think. So they are often either just observing you or they are withdrawn from the situation. They couldn't care. They're just there. You shouldn't worry too much. But then what's good communication? What's effective communication? When there is enough questions, okay, and there's enough advocacy, because then there is mutual learning and it can seem over engaging at times, but that over engaging is okay. For example, through chat, when you all unmute yourselves and speak, it's over engaging, but that over engaging is good because there is mutual learning. So the balance between advocacy, how much of an opinion are you sharing and how much of questions are you asking, how much of questions are you being asked, how much of opinions are being shared with you, that balance, getting to that balance becomes important as a researcher when you're communicating. And with that, when you do this well, the ladder of inference is what is strong. It's better. It's more effective. That's when communication is more effective. When there's mutual learning and there's over engaging, there's the right amount of advocacy and there is the right amount of inquiry. Give yourself some thought. Think of, as an audience in a conference, what kind of questions do you ask? As a presenter, what kind of questions do you like? That will give you an idea what do you like in that box of inference. It will immediately give you an idea what is it that you like. What kind of questions are you comfortable? It's your comfort zone. It's also your strength. Okay. All right. Okay, so what have we done today? We have looked at communication basics. We have looked at our learning styles, which is VAK. We have looked at our communication styles, which is your assertive, passive, passive-aggressive, and aggressive. Okay, we have also looked at advocacy and inquiry. We have looked at essential communication. We have looked at effective communication. And why have we done this today? Because as researchers, not only do you have to develop your writing skills, but you have to develop your communication skills. Okay. Okay, so the entire thing of pronouns become very important. For example, a lot of conferences today, a lot of things, okay, you don't write his and her, right? You have a different terminology for it, okay, so that includes all genders. Similarly, a lot of discourses do not use women. They use WOMXN, okay, because it includes all genders. So obviously the way the gender spectrum is being addressed, or the way the pronouns are being addressed is very different. And often, yes, Victor, the easy way to do it, yeah, it's her or zer. That's right. Okay, Victor, the easy way to do it is they, but again, some people feel they is not all encompassing, and that's why you have her or zer, or you have them for all. Okay, so the changes, it again depends on your area of work. Not all area of work is that sensitive to the gender component. Okay, so depending on your area of work and your domain of work and your writing, you will have to decide how you want to address the gender component in your writing. Okay, but if you want to be inclusive, ideally use them and they. Okay, it's an ideal scenario. Okay. Advocacy high and low and inquiry high and low. Advocacy high is explaining and imposing. It is inquiry low. You're not asking enough questions, but you're only explaining as a presenter. Then that's also problematic. I'm only telling you what I think, but I'm not open to asking questions from you. Okay. Advocacy low. Okay. And inquiry low is where I'm only observing. I'm just a participant in a discussion. I'm not saying much on my mind. That's also problematic. But inquiry high and advocacy low is where I'm asking too many questions. That's inquiry high and advocacy low. Okay. All right, participants, that is what we have for today. We can open up for questions right now.
Yeah, go ahead and ask all the questions, participants, and we'll also be sharing the attendance Google form, so please fill it as well.
For the next session, I will be sharing exercise book. You don't have to do anything before the session, but you will have to carry that with you. Okay.
Also, participants, when we share exercise booklets, you don't have to complete it and send it to us. You can just keep it with yourselves and be ready for the next class. That's
I don't want Meera waking up to 100 emails from all of you. Yeah, that's just for your reflection. Okay. If you don't have any questions, we're going to do this activity. Do all of you have a sheet? Do we have more assignments? Janet, I will give you one assignment after the 6th unit. And by then, hopefully, I'll also finish correction. I'm kind of halfway through. I'll also finish correction of the first assignment. And you, from my end, you will have one more assignment. And Meera will also keep you appraised of maybe another assignment that will come from the other.
For the 7th module, we might have another assignment as well. So there'll be 3 assignments in all. The next one will be again from Madhurima ma'am, and she will share it after this module.
Okay. Sangeetha, you don't have to be sorry, but we're just saying for further. You know, we're not downloading and reading your responses. So, but Meera's inbox is full. Okay, so while you have your questions coming, I want you all to do this. I want you all to take a sheet of paper, A4 paper. It can be a used paper, rough paper. It doesn't have to be a fresh paper. Any A4 size paper. Janet, the course is from NIAS. It's not from IISc, so I'm not sure what your question is about. Do all of you have a A4 paper with you? Yes, no? Yeah, okay. I want people, whoever can come online, to come online. Or maybe stay offline, we'll come online in a while, we'll come on video, okay? Now I want you all, I'm going to do an activity with you all, and then we'll reflect on why that activity is. Everybody's ready? A4 sheet, it could be a rough paper, it could be a paper you're meaning to throw away, it could be a pamphlet, anything. It should be approximately A4. Are we ready, participants? Yes, we have our A4 sheets. Pragya, I presume you're in office because you're wearing the mask. Or you're at home with a help who's walking around and you're wearing the mask, one of the two. Okay. All right, we have the paper. Fantastic. Okay. Now, I want you all to listen. You cannot ask me any questions. Okay? You will only listen and you will only do as I say. Okay? I want you all to fold your paper. Don't show on the video now. Just do it. We'll later see what happens. I want all of you to fold your paper. Fold the paper. You're folded? Yes, folded. You don't need so much time, no? You would have folded. Now, tear apart from the right-hand corner of the paper. Tear apart from the right-hand corner of the paper. You've torn apart from the right-hand corner? Okay. Now, tear apart from the left-hand corner. Tear apart from the left-hand corner. Done? Okay. Fold the paper again. Fold the paper again. Okay. Now, tear apart from the top middle. Tear apart from the top middle. Okay. Now, tear apart from the bottom middle. Okay. Now, fold your paper one more time. Fold the paper one more time. And tear apart from any part of the paper. Tear apart from any part of the paper. Done? Now come on video and show me your masterpieces. Come, open, everybody. Mansi's paper is torn. Shamanuja has like one small piece and something, I think, on the hand. Narsimha's paper is also torn at sides. Okay. Okay. What happened, participants? What happened? Very nice. Thank you. Awesome. Awesome. That's very cool. Okay. Okay. Some of you have 6 holes. Some of you have 4. Some of you 3. Okay. What happened? Quickly. Perceptions are different. Okay. What were the barriers of communication? What were the barriers of communication? Instructions are received differently. Why are instructions received differently? I didn't give you enough details. You couldn't ask questions. I created a physical barrier. I said fold. Yeah, Shamanuja, what's the problem with fold? Fold, no? Fold. Fold has one meaning, no? Fold paper. But I didn't tell you vertically, horizontally. I didn't tell you instructions, right? My instructions were ambiguous, not how to. I completely created a barrier of no interaction, right? So what did I take away in this game? How many times to fold? Keshav, I think I told you 6 times to fold. Spandita, no problem. If there's no problem with your webcam. Yeah? Details were missing. One-sided communication, right? All of this are barriers in communication that we did right now. And it has very little to do with language, right? You understood the language. You spoke in a common language. But what is it? Ambiguity, not giving clear instructions, not allowing for inquiry. I didn't allow you to ask me questions. There was not enough advocacy. I didn't explain enough to you all. So what did I do in the communication? It's a simple craft activity. I reduced the ladder of inference. And because of that, each of you came up with very different masterpieces of yours. Okay, in the next session, okay, it's a simple 45-second to 60-second activity to show you how communication barriers impact us. Okay, in the next session, we will do another form of a game like this to close the session again, to show another form of how communication, how to tear. What do you mean tear? I don't know what a straight tear is, Keshav. That sounds like an interesting terminology, but I don't know. You mean do you tear it straight? Okay, yeah, obviously. But usually whole or okay, but usually when people tear, they just tear a small part. Very few people tear the whole paper. And that's why I think we saw some pieces of paper, right? But what was this game about? This game was about all the barriers of communication that we spoke about and how communication very easily can be ineffective and how our ladder of inference can actually reduce. Okay, do we have any question? Any question? We have a couple of minutes and then we can, close the session. Thank you. I hope you all did not waste a new paper. That's why I said you have a used paper. Any questions? Meera, do we have any question?
Can't see any right now.
No? If no questions, we can close. Do this game with your team. You'll know if they're listening or not. Pooja, while communicating. Pooja has a question, Meera. Pooja, do you want to come on video and ask? We're almost at end of the session. We want to see more faces. That's the whole idea of asking you all to come on video.
Pooja, are you here? We are trying to unmute you.
Yeah, I can ask the question. Yeah. So so my question is, I face barrier while communicating with an individual who is passive aggressive in nature. So what could be some of the techniques, like you used fogging and earlier you mentioned for an aggressive person, right?
Okay.
So what could be possible methods to use to enable the communication to move forward? Because I face a barrier that just gets stuck.
Passive aggressive?
Yes.
Yeah. Pooja, the challenge with passive aggressive is they're very sweet in the face, right? So you will have to identify if there is a pattern to their behavior, if there is something that triggers them and they behave like that with you, right? So being on the other end, it's challenging for you. You have to invest that time to understand what is it that's triggering that kind of communication, and then have an honest, open conversation with them. If somebody is passive aggressive, you'll have to be very strongly assertive with them to get the point across. Otherwise, they will not. So a person who's passive aggressive, the moment you are assertive, they will become aggressive, and you'll immediately know what the reason is. Because it's very easy for people to shift from passive aggressive to aggressive. Right? So you will have to figure out what the reason is for the passive aggressiveness and then figure out how to communicate with the person. Till you get to the core, it's not possible. I hope that helps, but that's one way. I don't have enough information to tell you more, but that's one way in a very generic fashion. The other thing is what we call confrontational technique, which means using a combination of fogging and broken record. So when they are being aggressive, you first fog, you first just listen, okay. And then you tell what's on your mind multiple times. So you'll have to use a combination of it and use inquiry and advocacy. It's called a confrontational technique. That's one assertive technique that you can use to break a passive aggressive person. Okay. We have one or two more questions, I think, Meera. Eye contact is important. Shamisha, very simple thing, right? I mean, if I had to teach you all in live face-to-face session, right? I always make sure I walk around the class. I always make sure I look at people, because you don't know. I mean, if I had to constantly look at a wall and talk to you all, or imagine if I'm sitting like this, right? And I'm looking at, I have a large window across, and imagine I'm looking at it, I'm not looking at you all. Even though I can't see you all constantly, I always look at the camera. Because it's important, because at any point of time, you look at the camera and you look at me, you should think I'm talking to you in person. And that's important in effective communication. But that doesn't mean I bore you, I do this. No. So even in face-to-face, you don't have to constantly look at a person or bore your eyes into them. But you'll have to once in a while look. So if you're talking to an audience, shift left to right. Eye movement has to be left to right, ideally. Right? And then shift. Also look at your aisles. If you have a large hall and aisles, pause at an aisle. Pause at the first row, third row, seventh row. If your third or fourth row from a stage is usually at eye level. So that's your best point of contact when you're talking to a large audience. Right? And people who have done theater would also know that third or the fourth row in a theater is what's at your eye contact. Okay, so that's where you ideally look. Okay, any other questions?
Ma'am, we'll take one last question perhaps from Snehal. Snehal, we would like to see you, and perhaps you can ask your question as well.
Good afternoon, ma'am. So my question was, can voice modulation or tone be a communication barrier? Because in my personal experience, I had that kind of, I had myself experienced it. So can it be a communication barrier?
Snehal, I lost you. Can you repeat that?
Okay. So what your voice modulation, for example, my voice modulation or anyone's voice modulation or the tone can be a communication barrier.
Yeah, it can. It can. So it's like this, right? Apart from body language, Snehal, your intonation is very important. Like I said, I cannot tell you something exciting sounding dull.
Okay.
You see the difference? So I cannot tell you something that's serious sounding funny. Oh, Snehal, your paper didn't get accepted. Acha, okay. It doesn't. There's no congruency. I hope that doesn't happen. But what I'm trying to say is your intonation has to be congruent with your body language, your expression, the words you use. It's very, very important. And I think today with virtual setups, I think it's even more, because I'm sure a lot of you are doing international conferences which are virtual again this year, right? So it becomes very important you work on your body language.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you all want me to do a small segment on body language and presentation, please let me know. I can maybe we can spend maybe 10-15 minutes next class focusing on body language and presentation in terms of the body language and intonation.
Sure, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I can maybe, Meera, just give me a reminder. I'll add that to the content for next week, along with narratives. We'll spend a little time on body language and what's powerful body language. You know, what's a good stance for a speaker. Okay. Yeah. All good.
Okay, so thank you everyone for all those interesting questions, and thank you so much, ma'am, for another wonderful session.
Thank you, Meera.
Really enjoying all of them. So we look forward to your next session as well. And I have to thank Dr. Sangeetha Menon for facilitating this platform for us, and Team CSP, which includes Niharika Sharma, Abhishek Shrivastava, Ashwini Ji, Pushya, all of us who are working in the background here. So thank you everybody for doing all of this good work. So again, thanks everyone, and we'll see you again for the next class.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone. Have a lovely week. See you all next week. Bye-bye.